There is something that almost nobody talks about openly, but the science is unambiguous. A single touch lasting under 3 seconds can flood a woman's brain with enough oxytocin to keep her feeling emotionally connected to you for hours. That is not a romantic notion. That is neurobiology. And yet, the vast majority of men have never been told which specific touches produce that response and which ones quietly convince a woman she has no interest in seeing them again. What follows are 7 touches that genuinely change everything, and the 5th one borders on unfair. Here is something worth understanding before anything else. A woman who has lived enough life does not fall in love through words. She has received every compliment imaginable. She has read the sweet messages. She has sat across from men at dimly lit dinners who tried desperately to say the perfect thing. Words lost their power over her a long time ago. What actually reaches her? What actually finds its way past? The walls she has carefully constructed over years is something far more ancient than language. It is touch, but not careless touch, not the clumsy imitation of something seen in a film. The kind of touch being described here is specific, deliberate, and psychologically resonant. It communicates things that sentences simply cannot. Safety, confidence, tenderness, desire, all of it transmitted without a single word spoken. A psychologist at UC Berkeley named Dashir Kellner conducted a study in which strangers were asked to convey emotions through brief contact on the forearm alone. No words, no visible expressions, just touch. The findings were remarkable. People could correctly identify emotions like love, gratitude, and sympathy through touch with nearly 78% accuracy. Language rarely achieves that kind of precision. So, if there has ever been a question in the back of the mind about why certain men seem to create effortless emotional connection with women while others try everything and still end up in the friend category, this is the answer. It is not about what is being said. It is about how presence is communicated through contact. And a woman who has moved through enough of life, who knows exactly what she wants and what she will no longer accept, responds to this on an entirely different level than someone with far less experience behind her. Before walking through all 7 of these touches, there is something worth flagging. 2 of them will seem almost embarrassingly simple, and the temptation will be to dismiss them entirely. That would be a mistake. Those are precisely the ones that women have described repeatedly and unprompted as producing feelings they struggle to put into words. And the final touch on the list, the 7th, carries a psychological effect powerful enough that relationship therapists actually prescribe it to couples who are on the verge of walking away from each other. The reason why will make complete sense when it comes up. The first touch is something that might be called the slow lower back guide. Before writing it off as basic etiquette, consider the neuroscience underneath it because it is genuinely remarkable. When a hand is placed gently at the small of a woman's back, perhaps while guiding her through a doorway, moving together through a crowded room, or standing beside her at a social event, something specific happens neurologically. The lower back is one of the most nerve-dense regions of the human body with direct pathways running to the brain's emotional processing centers. A slow, warm, confident hand placed there bypasses rational thought entirely, but the details of how it is done matter enormously. A quick tap reads like something a distant relative might offer. Too much pressure feels domineering. What produces the response being described is a slow, steady, full palm placement with just enough weight to communicate without words that there is awareness and presence here. Psychologists describe this as triggering a protective bonding response. The nervous system interprets it as safety. Oxytocin is released, and on an emotional level, she begins associating being near this person with a sense of calm. A woman with real-life experience responds to this particular touch in a way that runs especially deep, because she has likely spent years being her own source of strength. She has handled things alone. She has been her own protector. When a man places his hand at her lower back with quiet, unhurried confidence, it does not read as control. It reads as communication. It says without any words at all that she does not have to carry all of it by herself right now. For a woman who has been holding the weight of her life together largely on her own, that single gesture can mean more than an extravagant romantic display ever could. A woman in her late 40s once described it this way: Paraphrased, he placed his hand on my back as we walked into the restaurant, and I felt something I had not felt in 15 years. I felt chosen. The second touch is one that is deeply underestimated, and that is the two-handed handhold. Holding hands on its own is nothing remarkable. What is being described here is different. This is when her hand is taken, and then the other hand comes over to cradle it, both hands wrapped around one of hers, perhaps during a meaningful conversation, perhaps during a quiet moment, perhaps right after she has shared something vulnerable. The reason this works comes down to something called bilateral stimulation. When both hands are engaged in holding hers, the symmetrical sensory input signals to her brain that she has someone's complete attention and full emotional presence. Therapists actually incorporate bilateral touch into EMDR sessions to help patients move through emotional trauma. So when her hand is held this way, her brain receives a message that says she is safe and she is seen. For a woman with life experience behind her, this can be quietly devastating in the most meaningful way. She has likely spent time with men who were physically present but mentally absent, body at the table, mind somewhere completely else. When someone holds her hand with both of theirs and actually looks at her while she speaks, they are offering something she may have quietly stopped expecting: complete, embodied, undistracted attention. The contrast alone is what gives this touch its power. When she feels both hands wrapped around hers with warmth and intention, something in her brain registers this person as different. And once a woman with real experience reaches that conclusion, no one else is coming close. The third touch is the one that tends to catch women completely off guard. It is the forehead touch. Not a forehead kiss, though something related will come up later. This is the act of gently resting a forehead against hers, both foreheads making contact, eyes falling closed. Naturally, breathing gradually, synchronizing, the noise of everything else fading. It sounds simple. The psychological weight of it is anything but. Dr. Sue Johnson, who created emotionally focused therapy and is among the most cited relationship researchers in the field, has written at length about what she calls bonding moments. These are small, specific interactions that activate the adult attachment system in the same way a caregiver's touch activates it in an infant. The forehead touch is one of the most potent of these moments. The reason comes down to what it requires. This kind of closeness cannot happen at arm's length. It demands proximity. It demands slowing down. It demands letting the guard drop from both people. For a woman who has spent years building emotional defenses high enough to screen out most of what the world has thrown at her, this touch is a quiet, unhurried knock on a door she forgot was still there. It does not push. It does not demand. It simply says, "Right here, right now, nothing else is competing for this moment." A man who can stay in that without rushing it, without breaking the silence with nervous humor, because the intimacy feels like too much. That man has just demonstrated more emotional intelligence than most people manage across entire relationships. The fourth touch is one that could almost have been left off this list because of how effective it is. It is the back of the neck touch. The nape of the neck is among the most sensitive and exposed areas of the human body. It is densely packed with nerve endings, and because it is a region that cannot be easily seen or instinctively protected, contact there produces a simultaneous and very rare combination of responses: heightened arousal and deepened trust, both at once. Most physical contact creates one or the other. This one produces both in tandem. When a man rests his fingers or his palm gently at the back of a woman's neck, whether seated beside her, leaning in to say something quietly, or in a moment of closeness, her brain runs through a rapid internal evaluation. Is this safe? Do I trust this person? Does this feel right? If all three answers are yes, the emotional response comes almost immediately. Her breathing shifts. Her pupils dilate. Neurochemically, dopamine and oxytocin are released together, which is the precise combination at the center of romantic attachment. A younger woman might not even recognize what this touch is communicating. A woman with experience absolutely does. She understands immediately that it signals confidence without aggression, desire without desperation, and familiarity without presumption. That is a rare and sophisticated combination, and the women who recognize it have been waiting, whether they would admit it or not, for exactly that level of awareness. One critical note here: timing is not negotiable with this one. This touch does not exist at the beginning of a connection. It cannot be offered to someone met an hour ago. What makes it powerful is that it arrives after trust has already been built. It is a progression, not a technique to deploy early. A woman with real experience will recognize the difference between those two things instantly. The fifth touch is the one mentioned at the very beginning, the thumb stroke. It sounds minor. The psychology behind it is genuinely fascinating. The thumb stroke happens when hands are already connected, or when a hand rests on her arm, her shoulder, or her knee, and without any announcement, without even looking down, the thumb begins moving slowly back and forth across her skin, small strokes, rhythmic, unhurried. The conversation continues as though nothing particular is happening. This works because of a specific category of nerve fibers called catatactile afferents. These nerves respond exclusively to slow, gentle stroking contact and are wired directly into the brain regions that govern emotional connection and social bonding. Researchers at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden found that this kind of slow stroking activates the insular cortex, the area of the brain responsible for feelings of intimacy and closeness. In plain terms, when the thumb moves slowly across her skin, the part of her brain that generates feelings of emotional closeness is being directly stimulated. And because the gesture is so quiet and unannounced, she may not consciously notice it, but her brain notices. Her body responds, and emotionally she finds herself drawn closer, in a way she might not be able to name or explain. This is why it borders on unfair. A woman with real experience, someone who has lived through relationships where affection was either performative or completely absent, will feel that small, almost absent-minded thumb stroke and think to herself, he is not even aware he is doing it. This is simply who he is. That thought, that belief, that tenderness here is effortless rather than calculated is what tips her. Not the grand gestures, not the expensive evenings, the quiet, unconscious movement of a thumb during an ordinary conversation. That is what love actually feels like to a woman who has already seen everything else. The sixth touch is what might be called the silent pull. This is the moment when sitting beside her or standing close without a word, one arm reaches over and draws her in. Maybe it goes around her shoulder, maybe a hand finds her waist and closes whatever distance remained between them. No announcement, no verbal invitation, just movement. This works on a principle that attachment researchers call proximity seeking. In attachment theory, one of the clearest markers of secure bonding is the instinctive impulse to close physical distance. When she is pulled closer without being asked, without it being tied to any agenda, what is being mirrored is exactly what a securely bonded partner does naturally. The message being sent through that action alone is the space. Between us felt like too much. Here is something that rarely gets said directly about women in their late 30s and beyond. Many of them have spent years feeling as though closeness had to be earned, as though they needed to be appealing enough, agreeable enough, or accommodating enough to deserve affection. They have been in relationships where physical nearness only appeared when the other person wanted something from them. So when a man pulls her close simply because he wants her nearby, not because anything is being initiated, not because anyone is watching, but simply because the gap felt wrong, it quietly rewrites something she has been telling herself for a long time. It tells her she is wanted not for what she provides, not for what she does, but simply for existing in the same space as him. Anyone who doubts how powerful that is has never watched a self-sufficient, accomplished woman completely soften because someone wordlessly pulled her closer during an ordinary evening. And now the seventh touch, saved for the end because it carries more weight than everything else on this list put together. It is the long-hold hug, not the brief squeeze, not the back-patting friend hug, not the one-armed half-embrace that communicates polite acknowledgement without any real commitment. This is both arms, chest to chest, fully present, lasting a minimum of 20 seconds. That number is not arbitrary. Research published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology found that hugs lasting 20 seconds or longer produce a significant release of oxytocin while simultaneously reducing cortisol, the body's primary stress hormone. What that means in practice is that a long hug does not simply make a woman feel loved. It reduces her stress at a biological level. Her heart rate slows, her blood pressure drops, her nervous system shifts out of fight-or-flight activation and into a parasympathetic state, which is the condition where genuine bonding and emotional openness become neurologically possible. This is precisely why relationship therapists prescribe extended holding to couples in crisis. Dr. John Gottman, whose research on relationships spans more than 4 decades, has recommended prolonged physical embrace as one of the most effective tools available for rebuilding emotional trust between partners. This is not metaphor. It is not feel-good advice. It is a clinically supported intervention. What makes this matter so profoundly for a woman with real-life experience is this. By the time a woman reaches her 40s, 50s, or further, she has very likely moved through loss, heartbreak, betrayal, and a kind of loneliness she never discussed with anyone. She has learned to keep herself together so seamlessly that most of the people around her have no idea what she is carrying. She became her own support system because there was no other option. When someone wraps their arms around that woman and does not let go after 2 seconds, but holds on, unhurried, without rushing toward the next thing, something happens inside her that is beyond her control. Every wall, every defense, every internal instruction to stay guarded, it all softens. Not because she is fragile, but because for the first time in longer than she can easily remember, she does not have to be the strong one. That is the most profound thing touch can accomplish. Not to excite, not to impress, but to relieve. To give her wordlessly permission to stop holding everything together for just a moment. If that is what someone can offer her, she will not simply fall in love. She will make a choice, deliberate and repeated, with every part of herself she has spent years protecting from the wrong people. 7 touches. Every one of them grounded in psychology, neuroscience, and the actual lived experience of women who know exactly what genuine connection looks and feels like. And not one of them requires money, status, or perfect circumstances. They require awareness, intention, and the willingness to slow down enough to actually be present with the person in front of you. But understanding these touches is only part of what matters, because a woman who is interested is not sitting passively waiting to be reached. She is sending signals of her own, subtle, consistent, and entirely readable once the language is understood. Most men miss them completely, and then cannot understand why the connection faded. That is exactly why the next thing worth watching is a breakdown of the 6 specific behaviors a woman displays when she has already decided she wants to be closer to someone. If any of this resonated, do not stop here, because recognizing her signals is just as important as knowing how to reach her. If you have experienced this firsthand, share it with someone who needs to hear.